Today, we are talking about strategy, specifically frameworks. Now, I was on a flight to Dallas. I arrived early, took my seat, helped the plane take off on time. And as I'm waiting, I see someone come in and they want to put their carry-on in the overhead compartment. Now, this was a very small plane. There was barely any space for people, let alone luggage. So this person is now trying to fit their standard carry-on in what seems like a very small compartment. And they're pushing it in, and they're going from one side and another side. At one point, I think they started to punch the bag. And I'm thinking, man, they're about to break this overhead compartment. The plane is not going to take off. This is at least a 3 or 4 or 5 hour delay. That's great. And as I'm thinking all this, the bag slipped on its side a little bit and it just went in perfectly. The person was equally as surprised. They patted themselves on the back and they sat down. And this is a great metaphor for strategy. The right approach, the right framework, the right tweak can make all the difference. Now, I want to start a new series in this channel where I want to review popular frameworks for approaching strategy. I have 4 or 5 here in my initial list, and I'll make these videos over time and then put them in a playlist or something. Now, the first one I want to do is Playing to Win, one of my favorite books. So let's jump right in. Hi there. My name is Ruben Garta. I'm an expert in decision making and strategy, and I work with over 90 organizations, helping them formulate a strategy, implement it, and go through it. Now, there's lots of frameworks. I have a framework I like to use, which I will review in a future video. But I also want to review some of the other popular frameworks that are out there that you may have come across, and you may even be using yourself, or you may be thinking about using. The very first one I want to talk about is Playing to Win. Now, here's the book cover. I read this book many years ago. I really like this book. It's a really fantastic book that you should definitely check out if you haven't. It was written by A.G. Leafy and Roger Martin, with Leafy being the CEO of Procter & Gamble over 2 stints, from 2000 to 2010, and I want to say 2012, 2015. And in this stint, he did lots of things. One of them, of course, helped with strategy. It helped really level up many of the key brands or products in the portfolio, like Tide. Brought innovation into the company, made the company more consumer-driven, and overall really, really helped the company succeed during this time period. Now, he partnered with Roger Martin, who's a thinker and advisor, also a fantastic resource. He has a website, he has articles on Medium and Harvard Business Review, so check those out. Both of them wrote this book together as a way to showcase the approach they were using at P&G at the time. And the framework is actually simple, which I really like. So this is a great book, Playing to Win. So let's look at the framework in detail, actually. So let me switch here to my iPad. You can see here I have an image, and this is actually the entire framework. The book really spends time going through each of the boxes in detail. And what I really like about the book, actually, is they give a lot of case studies from their, the P&G portfolio. This is what we did with Tide. This is what we did with this other toothpaste. So they give all these really real life case studies on how the boxes kind of played for what they were doing. Now, when we look at these boxes here, we can see there's 5. And they have it's a cascading list of choices. And this framework really captures 2 fundamental ideas that both authors wanted to get across. One is the strategy was for winning. And this may seem obvious, but their perspective was you really have to want to win in some specific market area or location in some way. So it's not just about profit, it's really about winning, being number 1 in the market. Now, some people may disagree with this, some people may, of course, agree with this, but that's the first fundamental assumption that's behind this entire framework. The second one is the strategy is about choices. And you have to make choices, you have to commit. You may be wrong, of course, but you have to do it. So they were trying to force themselves, and anyone who might use this framework, to say, this is the choices, you will do this, you will not do this. not let's have as many options as possible. Let's be flexible. Let's be open to serendipity. Let's make choices. So based on that, they established this 5 boxes. Let me give you a quick overview of what they are. First, our win and aspiration. This is very similar to vision and purpose and so on. When I go through strategy, I talk about raison d'etre, why are you here as an organization? And this is, of course, a long-term view. It doesn't change often. It's not meant to, but it just simply captures what are we trying to do as an organization. Starbucks, for example, their mission is to provide a coffee cup in every community around the world, something like that. And that doesn't change often. So that's really the first starting point. What's the win and inspiration? I really like this, right? The where and the how go together. It really starts to say, where will we play? And this is where you're trying to select a customer segment, a type of product, a geography, some other area in your organization. And of course, how naturally ties into that by saying, once we choose a customer segment, how will we win in that segment? So if you choose to play in the luxury customer segment, how will we do that? What kind of products might we release? Do we need to change brand? Do we need to change our messaging? And so on and so on. This is, again, where you first start to see the idea of choices. You can only play in certain areas, the where, and you can only do that in certain ways. And we're really talking about a handful of things. When I go through strategy, we talk about strategic factors and choices. And it's the same thing. We're talking about 2 or 3 factors. And then from those factors, there's probably 2 or 3 critical issues that make sense. So this is what we try to capture in these 2 boxes here, the where and the how. And the last 2 boxes, again, go together. The capabilities and the management systems here. So they're saying, once we know where we want to play, how we want to play, what capabilities do we need to do? You can really think about this as skills or things that have to be developed in the organization. And of course, systems is a very broad way to talk about communication systems, information systems, review systems, leadership systems, and so on. Right? This to me also hides elements like accountabilities and so on, monitoring and other things. Right? When I look about strategy, we of course talk about accountabilities and how we're going to monitor it, who's responsible for what. Is there something that needs to be developed or sustained, some kind of technological system, communication system, and so on. So you go through the cascading choices, limiting things, removing things, choosing things along the way, and then by the end you have what's really going to be a very short document, 1 or 2 pages with all your answers, and then you go ahead and do it, right? You go ahead and tackle it. So I love this progression. I love that it's simple. Even when we talk about it in a few minutes, there's a lot to be understood from it. There's details, which I'll cover in a second, but the framework itself is not complex, which I really like. Right? Now, some of the things that I think where it doesn't do as well, and if you're thinking about using this framework, you really have to think about how to tackle them. First, I think there's a lack of identity in the framework. I talked about the value of identity in a previous video here in the channel, who you are as an organization and who you should be as an organization. Is it similar to the question Drucker used to ask, what business are you in? What business you should be in? So this is, I think, covered partially in the win and inspiration, perhaps in the where and how, but more explicit labels to it, I think will be really helpful. There's a lot of things you could do. You can make a lot of choices about where to play and how to play and systems and so on. But if you're not doing it within the overall context of this is who you are as an organization and this is who you should be, it can really be the ineffective decisions, right? In the previous video, which I'll link here, I talked about Sears, right, and how they switch from seeing themselves as a catalog, mail, order in organization, and then they switched to seeing themselves as a retailer when they opened their first store in 1925. And then they failed to make an identity shift to become either Amazon, which is basically a modern version of Sears, or Walmart, which took a very similar approach, building stores outside city centers and so on. So they failed to make that shift, even though they made lots of decisions about where to play and how to play and so on. So that's the first thing that I think it's lacking here in an explicit nature in the framework. The second thing is I don't think there's enough focus on perception. And what I've seen in my work is there's always gaps in perception, whether there's external perception, how your customers perceive you, how they perceive you from an identity perspective, what they think you do, and internal, does your leadership team all share the same perspective on the challenges, on the opportunities, and so on. So there has to be something done to bridge those perception differences before you can even talk about where to play and how to play. Otherwise, people will say, we should play here, obviously, because my perception is that we could be really good in this area. We could be really good in this specific customer segment. Someone else might say, I don't have the perception. Why are we doing that? The third thing is, again, I think accountabilities are implicit, especially once you get down to capabilities and systems. I think they should be much more explicit. Very few strategies ever fail in the formulation. So this is a great framework. I'll talk about other great frameworks that can help you formulate strategy, but really the challenges arise in the implementation. So we have to look at what those challenges are, and accountabilities is one of those things. People agree to the plan, they're excited, but they go back and they're not accountable to the things they wanted to work on. So we have to make accountabilities explicit to make sure that this is what needs to happen, under what timeline, and this is what success means. And the fourth one, challenge that I have with the framework is there's lack of details. The book itself has great examples, but there's not a lot of details around, this is how long the formulation should take, this is how long to think about, this is what happens when you get to this where box or how box, and so on. I will say Roger actually has a series in his blog called A Year in Strategy, where he wrote 25, 35 articles that really go into a lot of details for the framework. So they're not really in the book, but they're outside, so you have to go seek them out. So this may be perhaps a criticism of the book, not perhaps of the framework itself. So I will make that note, that there is some further details out there that you will have to sort of wade through to understand how to formulate or fully use the framework. Like I said, this is one of my favorite frameworks. It's one of the books I recommend the most when thinking about strategy or trying to understand what strategy really is. It's fantastic. It's a great starting point. If you're using this, you really cannot go wrong. You'll see how it compares to other frameworks in future videos as I flesh out this series. And of course, the framework I use myself and how I thought about or taken different pieces from other frameworks into a more modern approach that I try to take companies through. And that is everything I have for today. As always, if you enjoy this, you can subscribe to the channel. You can look in the description box and you'll find a few things. A link to my newsletter in Substack, where I cover similar ideas in a written format, and often I cover ideas that I don't really cover anywhere else. So I highly recommend you check that out. I think this week I was writing about Sears and the identity struggle that Sears had when it came to strategy. So very relevant to what we are talking about today. You can also find links on my website and anything else, books and so on that you may find helpful. Finally, in the comments section below, why don't you write what are your thoughts on Playing to Win? If you read the book, if you followed the framework, let me know and let others know how you're using it or how you think about this framework. Until next time, talk soon.